welcome everyone. It's my great pleasure today to host our annual lecture in honor of the late great Ian MacPherson. Now, I didn't have the pleasure of knowing Ian MacPherson, although I have encountered his name throughout my travels in credit union land. At the Central One office in Vancouver, for example, there's a plaque on the wall with his name on it, just to show you how deeply immersed he was into the credit union system, but also academia. So I'm going to guess that as someone who studied history and understood the kind of the constancy of change and adaptation, Ian would have accepted, maybe a little grudgingly, as some of us have, as we were just talking about, this shift to an online forum in this COVID era. But I think he would have understood why it was so important. So in some sense, that's what Brendan's going to talk to us about today, is that importance of change and the need for cooperatives to think differently, maybe a little bit about how they put their commitment to cooperative principles and values to work. So with that, I'd like to welcome Brendan Reimer to our virtual event. It's our first virtual MacPherson lecture. As the poster for this talk's noted, Brendan is the strategic partner of ValuesBased Banking at Winnipeg-based Assiniboine Credit Union. And he's going to share some reflections on Assiniboine's journey to become a certified B Corp and why he thinks that's an important step for credit unions that want to give life to their cooperative principles, values, and ethical norms. So before I turn the mic over to Brendan, just a few words about the technology. So I think I've mentioned this for those of you who just joined. Please keep yourself muted, but please feel free to have your video live. Brendan, and like most of us, enjoys that kind of visual feedback. So that'd be great if you can do that. If you can't, no problem. If you have a question as Brendan's going through his talk, please use the chat function or the raise hand function. The raise hand function is in the participants, under the participants icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and the chat is right next to it. So those are the two places where you can kind of engage as Brendan's going through his talk. And Stan, you and myself from the center will be monitoring both the chat feature and also the raise hand features. And then we'll kind of butt in and bring to Brendan's attention your question or hand raise. So with that, I'm going to welcome Brendan. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brendan. And I'm going to pass it over to you to carry on the conversation. Thanks so much.
Thanks. I really appreciate the invitation to join you in this session. It's quite an honor. I've had the opportunity to work with many of you and work with the center quite a bit in the past, and built a lot of good relationships. And it's so many familiar faces and names that I see on this call. It's great to reconnect, and it's especially an honor to be speaking as part of a series that recognizes Dr. Ian MacPherson. This is a person we know has had an incredible impact on the cooperative movement in terms of being a thought leader, but also someone who worked at the practical solutions and created a legacy here in Winnipeg, was involved with the Norwest Community Health Co-op. And you mentioned the Center for Co-op Studies there, and the role even globally with the International Cooperative Alliance. And part of what I want to explore today, I believe, is what I heard from him a lot, was this connection to purpose, the connection to purpose. And when I read the revisions and even the updated information that was provided as part of the 1995 kind of amendments to the International Cooperative Principles, and the guidance notes that have been provided along with that, and I believe that this was part of the vision and the passion that Ian brought to the cooperative movement. And I want to explore this a bit more. As you'll see, as I talk through some of what I'm going to present and raise some of the questions, there will be some links provided for you if you want to learn more about some of these topics that I'll talk about. And there's some additional resources that we don't have, the time to go into depth with here, but I believe are important. So thank you for having me here. I'm going to be asking you in a minute to participate, and I want you to contribute some words in the group chat area. If I was in person, we would just do a facilitated conversation, but it's a bit easier this way. With this technology, And I want to ask the question rooted in vision. When we talk about vision, we talk about purpose in the cooperative movement and even beyond it. But here's my question, and I would invite you to put the words in. What is it that we're trying to build? We talk about building a better world. We talk about the principles of cooperation. But when we envision the world we want to live in, when we envision the ideal state, what is it that it looks like? What is that community? When we think of how we would feel living in the best version of ourselves, the best version of society, how will other people feel? How will they experience life? How will they experience the world? And when we think about the generations to follow us, what will that look like? I think we spend a lot of time talking about the things we don't like in life and in the world, which is fair, because that kind of lets us know the things we don't like, which leads us to the things that we do like. I think it's really important to take the time to articulate what we want. So communities, inclusive society, diversity, health, socioeconomic and cognitive justice, inclusive and fair communities, solidarity, equality. Everyone has a chance to self-fulfill. Just transitions, equality, democracy, people-centered economy, collective intentions about us, not me. It's a fairly profound one, Karen, because that unpacks a whole approach to economy, to politics, to society. People-focused solutions, successful people-centered business model. Anyone else want to pop in some thoughts there? And Michael, when you're saying just transitions, I'm not sure if you're meaning around sustainability. I suspect it might be in terms of food systems, climate resilience, and all of these, and how it benefits all people. I can tell you, and those of you who I've worked with before know that I often start from this place, because I believe that it is important for us to all be rooted in vision. Anything that we do in whatever industry we work, whatever type of organization we're involved with, it is important to be rooted in a vision. And we need to know what that vision is. Inclusive and equitable, social infrastructure for knowledgeable economy. What I find really, really interesting, and I've asked this question and done this exercise with well over 100 groups of people, and this includes junior high kids, university students, civil servants, business students, employees at Assiniboine Credit Union. The word map that comes out is very, very similar. And in my experience, we have a beautiful diversity within our humanity on this planet. But what's really fascinating to me is when we ask the question about the kind of world we want to live in, the answers kind of come out the same. And I believe that despite all of our beautiful differences, deep down, we're much more the same than we are different. And I think what's really important, and as we talk about business models or community-based solutions, the way we organize society or economy, it's really important for us to be grounded in the sense of vision. Where are we going? What are we trying to build? Of course, there's a really important role to play for cooperatives. And of course, with the center and with this audience, I know we're passionate believers in the cooperative model for building many of the pieces of what you just named there. But here's my question. Well, before I ask the question, I'm going to go at a bit of a different place. The solutions are not just up to cooperatives to create. There's a very important role to play for individuals, right? And all of the things that we just listed, if every one of us as individuals are committed to those things, pursue those things, live them out, and and are thoughtful and deliberate about the way we live our lives in pursuit of that ideal, we will make progress. When 8 billion people are on the same page and committed to this kind of vision, we will make progress. As individuals and as societies, we've created institutions with the premise of helping us get there. The role of government is really, really important. We've seen this year in particular, the role of government in dealing with something like a pandemic, in working towards our collective health, at looking for solutions, at meeting basic needs when people's security is most threatened and most fragile. And the role of government in not only protecting us, putting in place guidelines, finding solutions, and meeting basic needs, not to mention, at least in our country, a commitment to public health, is really, really important to a lot of the principles and the values that you just listed. When guided by this kind of vision, government can be a really effective tool for helping us get there, in addition to the role of individual citizens. We know it doesn't always work quite that way, and so the role of nonprofits has emerged very strongly as well. And nonprofits are often at the front line dealing with the circumstances where we are not our best selves. And if you ever think about the work of nonprofits in our society, in our communities, and imagine what would happen if that just disappeared, I believe it would be catastrophic. Nonprofits are such a fundamentally important actor in our society in building the kinds of communities that we want. The role of academia is really important as well. The place where people are inspired through education, the place that provides thought leadership in terms of understanding our systems that will create the future we want, understanding the systems that stand in the way of the future we want, looking at solutions, evaluating ideas, and promoting effective practice, and shaping hearts and minds of future generations of leaders. But I want to talk a bit more today about the role of the private sector, because I think we understand that government is there for the public good. We understand that nonprofits exist for public good. We understand the role of academia in supporting the public good. There's more debate over the years, over the decades, on the role of business being focused on public good. And of course, this is where the role of cooperatives has emerged. Whether it was the visionaries in Rochdale, whether it was the visionaries on the east coast of Canada early in the last century, whether it was the leaders and the visionaries in the prairies who built the cooperative movement here, people were building cooperatives precisely because they understood that there was a different role for our economy to play, for business models to play, and it needed to be done differently. But I want to ask the question a bit differently from the first part, and I would invite you to enter some of the words again. When you think of our best self as society, right, that first collection of words, what would you name as the greatest threat to that future? What is the greatest challenge we face in having that be our reality today, tomorrow, and 7 generations from now? Where in society are we the furthest away from what we just described? And I just welcome you to enter it in. Racism, misinformation, discrimination, fragmenting of society, climate change, Eurocentrism, racism, sexism, compassion, and I assume you mean a lack of compassion, platform capitalism, notions of independence, Kathy, perhaps you mean as opposed to collective well-being? Capital markets driving the economy and society. Sonia, perhaps you mean as opposed to people-focused economy.
Indeed, I do. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, Sonia, I don't mean to put words in your mouth. Thank you. What are the other greatest challenges we face in having the future be what we want it to be? Right-wing populism and neo-fascism. So there you've got ideology, you've got even political models, perhaps. So here's my question, and keep adding pieces as you think of them. If some of our greatest challenges are racism, climate change, fragmenting of society, a lack of compassion, and discrimination, I see various things listed here, and there's various forms of discrimination that are still very strong in society and in our institutions and our systems. And if we still have economies and business models not necessarily focused on creating this kind of future, we have significant challenges that face us. And I might add that, you know, as I read the literature and as I read the news and kind of the different forecasting models, and it's tied in with climate resilience and it's tied in with discrimination, is economic injustice, economic inequities. And they're interconnected in a lot of these pieces as well. But here's my question, and I won't necessarily ask for responses, but this is something I wonder. Are the cooperative principles enough to get us there? Are the cooperative principles enough to deal with these greatest challenges? Are the cooperative principles enough for us to create the future that we want? Now, I spent 20 years promoting the cooperative model because of the principles, because of the vision, because of how it is transformative. But my question here is, when I look at some of these urgent issues that we're dealing with, fragmentation of society, discrimination, racism, climate change, our journey of reconciliation here in this country, economic justice, markets focused on things that seem to be creating outcomes that we don't really want. Are the cooperative principles enough? I think the short answer is it depends on how you interpret them. So there's a very diplomatic answer, right? I think when interpreted very conservatively, very cautiously, at the bare minimum of being a democratic institution serving members, it does address some pieces of this. And certainly for those, and again, if you read the guidance notes on the cooperative principles that have been published, it's a wonderful document. When interpreted much more robustly and progressively, and even politically, and I don't mean in a partisan way, then I believe it addresses a lot of these things that we're talking about here. But I think there's a very interesting question and or challenge to us who are leaders in the cooperative movement, is the degree to which the cooperative principles, especially as a baseline, the bare minimum interpretation of them, whether they are sufficient to build the future that we want and address the greatest challenges that we face. Certainly for some, they would understand that concern for community includes the environment, for example. But there are also many, and this is the reason why I think there's been a push to add an 8th cooperative principle around climate resilience. They don't necessarily see that fully embraced in the cooperative movement. And hence they push the need for an additional principle. I believe it's in the US where the credit union movement has been pushing for an 8th cooperative principle around diversity and inclusion. You could say that principle 1 that talks about open membership, and with a clear articulation of non-discrimination, you could say non-discrimination is dealing with that. But I think we also know that not every cooperative is committed to acting in a way that tackles racism and is an anti-racist organization. And this would be why the credit union movement in the United States, for example, is pushing for an 8th principle that brings this in, because we recognize that discrimination and hate in all its forms is one of the greatest threats, not only to society as we know it, but specifically to the vision of our best selves that we just finished articulating a few minutes ago. Are the cooperative principles enough to end racism? Are the cooperative principles enough to ensure climate resilience? I want to talk a bit about Assiniboine Credit Union's story. I'm going to leave that question with you to reflect on, and perhaps we can talk about it in the discussion part coming up a little bit more. I didn't grow up with dreams of being a banker, but I ended up at a financial institution. But I'll tell you the story of Assiniboine Credit Union, and maybe you'll understand what attracted me to being part of this. Part of what's really important, and the reason I started this talk with vision, is because I think everything we need to do needs to be wrapped in purpose, a compelling purpose. We know who we are, we know what we're doing to make the world a better place, and we know how we're doing that in the place that we work. I think a really important thing to do in that space is to connect with the founding vision of our cooperatives. I don't doubt that the people who kind of launched the cooperative movement on the East Coast decades ago, and the ones who brought it across the prairies over the years and launched them even in Northern Canada, had a very robust sense of justice, social, democratic, like political, economic justice. And they had a philosophy, they had a system analysis around what they were doing. And they saw this model that addressed a lot of the pieces towards justice. The story at the place I work now is not any different. When it was in 1943, a group of Winnipeggers realized that not everybody had access to credit when they needed it. And they pooled their money with the stated intent to transform banking by putting people first. Transformative is what they were looking for. They pooled their money. I understand they got $100 at their first meeting and spent 40 of it on ledgers and books, passbooks, and the other kinds of things that you would do to keep track of money back in the 1940s. But what's very interesting is that the first loan, I think, really told the story about what they were after. There was a father in our community here back then who had a daughter who had a blood disorder, wasn't able to produce her own blood very well. And so the father, for quite some period of time, had been giving his own blood through transfusions to keep his daughter alive. In the end, it failed and the daughter died. And in the midst of this grief, which I can't even fathom as a parent of young kids, how you would process that in that moment, a collection letter arrives for a $100 bill from the hospital. Not only are you grieving the loss of your daughter, you're now dealing with the stress of a collection that you don't know how to deal with and you don't have the resources to pay. This person was brought to this first collection of credit union leaders with this opportunity, and they got in touch with the collection agency and made a deal that for $50, they would let it go if they got the payment in 24 hours. And so the first credit committee, these first founding members got together, approved the loan. And this person paid the loan and then paid it back. And as they paid it back, they lent it out again and again and again. Money is a tool in our society. It is a resource. We can use it to create the outcomes we want. When we use our resources, and whether that be knowledge or money or whatever industry we might be in, policy, when we use our resource focused on humanity, focused on compassion, when focused on inclusion, focused on dignity, and focused on sustainability, we can make a real difference. We have these tools at our disposal, and we can make a difference. Money is one, the vehicle of a credit union is another. But I believe what's really important is to have it rooted in vision, have it rooted in these values, have it rooted in a sense of what we're trying to build, not have us ever become transactional or a commodity of any kind, but see ourselves as agents of change with the opportunity and the responsibility to build the future that we want. An interesting part of ACU's journey and story, though, the way I understand it, is that at some point, there were members who felt like the credit union perhaps lost sight of that founding passion, that founding vision, that founding sense of being transformative with compelling purpose. And the members took action, and the members organized and brought in a different board of directors in the early 90s, and it was called the greening of ACU. And perhaps part of the beauty of it is that you could only do that in a cooperative model, in a democratic model. Now, the greening wasn't so much about being environmental. It was about a rebirth. It was sort of a statement saying, remember who you are, remember why you were created, remember who you're meant to be, and we need you. And so ACU shifted. It was a cooperative. It was following the cooperative principle. But the members and the people in the community were saying, we need more. Part of the evolution in the early 90s then was a focus on community economic development, supporting affordable housing initiatives, affordable home ownership, supporting organizations working in poverty reduction. And that was kind of the original focus. And the community and the members kept saying, but we need more. You can do more. And in responding to the members, through then the turn of the century, there began to be more work around financial empowerment, opening branches in disinvested communities, making sure people had IDs so they could open bank accounts, providing opportunities to not only gain financial confidence and skills, but to build up savings for basic needs or education. It started to evolve in a commitment to climate resilience and a focus on ethical investment funds so that members could know that their money was actively doing good. And it continued to evolve. And I think part of why it continued to evolve is because the sense of vision that the leadership at Assiniboine Credit Union had came to be reflected in the vision statement. The last few words of ACU's vision statement are a sustainable future for all. A sustainable future for all. Now, when you talk about a sustainable future, yes, that is reflected in economics, that is reflected in societal sustainability and environmental sustainability. The power of the last two words are pretty profound as well. When you make the commitment for all, it means you will always be asking the question, where do we still fall short as society? Who is still left out? Where are our challenges in getting to that sustainable future for all? And what is our role in getting there? This strengthened ACU's commitment to climate resilience. This strengthened ACU's commitment to affordable housing as a human right and a basic need for people, everyone, to have a safe, dignified place to live and call home. This brought in diversity and inclusion as a core corporate value. And a couple of years ago, when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released its report, including the calls to action, it was a natural response by Assiniboine Credit Union to make a strong commitment to the call to action number 92, which is focused at the private sector, in committing to a meaningful engagement and journey in the healing journey that we all are a part of, that we need to be a part of. We will not have a sustainable future for all in our country and in most countries without a meaningful and restorative journey in reconciliation. But our members kept saying, we need more. There's more you can do. And of course, driven by that vision statement, there's always that reflection. So it started to evolve into a look at how spending is done, and brought in the creation of a values-based banking procurement policy, because we realize that every dollar we spend is also a vote for the kind of world we want to live in. And to the extent that we have advocated for people to join the cooperative movement to help reshape our economy, we also have the opportunity to shape our world by looking at how we spend our money. This journey isn't done for us. And I would propose that if we're grounded in that early vision of the world we're trying to create, our journey is not done for any of us, as individuals, as academics, as policymakers, as business leaders, and as cooperators. But part of what's really important, and was really important at Assiniboine Credit Union, is after 75 years of committing to this vision and doing this work, and in my experience, and what drew me to Assiniboine Credit Union just over 7 years ago, was this deep commitment to a sustainable future for all, a deep commitment to, of course, being best in industry, because our member owners expect and deserve nothing less, being successful to, yes, serve our members and serve our communities and be an exceptional place to work. We all work there, we want it to be great. But to this vision of building a better future, of a sustainable future for all. But the question at some point comes in, how are we doing? How are we doing? And I know there's been work over the years done by some of the people on this call to build frameworks for assessing to what extent cooperatives are living their values, living out the principles, how cooperatives are doing in being a transformative force for good in society. Well, Assiniboine Credit Union asked the same question and looked around, and what we landed on was the B Corp assessment. Now, for those who aren't familiar with it, it emerged probably about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe some of the early thinking, in the United States, in response to several factors. It was in response to people who were looking around at the needs of tomorrow, what we identified at the beginning, looking at the corporate model that they saw around them, and especially, on Wall Street and in that environment, and recognizing very distinctly that if our private sector, if our business world is not actively pushing us toward the world we want, we're not likely to ever get there. And dealing with, and especially those who study business theory, will be very familiar with the ethos for many in the private sector, motivated by Milton Friedman doctrine, that the only responsibility of a corporation is to maximize profits for the investors. Now, if that's the only responsibility of any business, and in fact, maybe is highly motivated then to pursue maximizing profits to the absolute extent it possibly can, we can easily understand how that might impact employees, how that might impact communities, how that might impact our environment. And they saw the need to create a different model for business and a different compelling purpose. They created the B Corp model, and in many states in the US, it is actually a legal structure that you can incorporate as now. To the extent that investors in a traditional model, part of the fear was, even if there was a CEO who wanted to bring an environmental strategy to their company, if there was a CEO who wanted to pay a living wage when they wouldn't necessarily have to in the industry, if there was a CEO who wanted to provide healthcare when their industry maybe didn't require it, the investors, they could get in serious trouble, potentially legal trouble, by bringing in those measures, because it could be seen as violating the Friedman principle, if you will, and being interpreted almost as taking profits out of the pockets of the investors by doing these things that we would generally see as good and building the kind of communities that we talked about in the beginning. So they envision that we need a different model for business, legally and by framework, so that everyone who joins this business as investor or employee or partners will now understand there's a different ethos behind this business model. It is something more akin to what we talked about in the beginning. That's why we exist as a business. Part of what was interesting then is to bring in all of the data from Assiniboine Credit Union. It's a very rigorous assessment. It's a 360 assessment, and many of you will be familiar with different certifications: fair trade, coffee and other products, right? Rainforest certified, organic food. There's many different kinds of certifications for either a product or one aspect of a company. Lead building certification. What this does is it wraps all of it together. It looks at your governance. How do you govern from a values lens? How is the experience that you're creating for your employees? What is your impact and commitment to your community and your local economy? What is your impact on the environment? And what is the impact you're creating for your clients, or in our case, member owners? It's a pretty rigorous 360 view of your company. And you enter in all this data, they double check it, they fact check you, they make you prove it, which is great because it means something, it's got teeth, the assessment. Out of 200 points, you need 80 points to become certified as a B Corp. I understand that for the companies who take the assessment, believing that maybe they're close, the average score is around 59. In general, what this means is they fall short of certification. This is deliberate. The bar is raised to elevate the practice of our business community around the world. Do better. And the incentive is by bringing in some changes to the way your business operates and the impacts you're having in the world around you, you will gain more points. Then you can get certified. So 80 points are required. The average score of the B Corps around the world, and now there's over 3,500 certified companies around the world that are B Corps. The average score is 89 out of 200. So it took a while. It's a lot of work to enter in all the data. But when we completed the assessment form, the score that came back to us at Assiniboine Credit Union was 166.4. I didn't quite know what to do with that at first. So we double checked the data. At first you think if it's an outlier, it must be wrong. When we verified it wasn't wrong, then my question was, what does this mean? And what came back to us was that out of over 300 certified B Corps in Canada, it was the highest assessment score achieved. And out of 3,500 B Corps around the world, ours was the 6th highest score in the whole world. So we'll celebrate the ranking for a bit and we'll be proud of it. But what this really means to me is that Assiniboine Credit Union has done an incredible job, I believe, living out the cooperative principles to the fullest extent you could interpret them. What it means to me is that Assiniboine Credit Union has fully honored that vision and passion and legacy and sense of compassion and justice that the founders created our credit union with. This kind of outcome tells me we are being who we're supposed to be. And it tells me that we're doing a good job in doing our part to build that world that we want to live in. Now, I want to tell you about a couple of reasons why I'm excited about this B Corp assessment, but I want to get to seeing if folks have some questions. One, I think it pushes cooperatives. This is a great opportunity for cooperatives to take the assessment and to aim for certification as a B Corp, because I believe it pushes us to be all we can be as cooperatives. I believe the cooperative principles give us an incredible foundation that contributes to many of these pieces: good governance and transparency, democratic control, commitment to community. Many of the pieces are already there. It's a solid foundation. But this assessment pushes us to do more. It pushes us to do more. And I to ask that question, are the cooperative principles enough? I think this assessment and this certification pushes us to be our fullest self, and that will give us the best chance of building that future world that we want. I'm excited because it not only pushes cooperatives, it brings in the entire private sector. And we need them. We need the role of government to help us build that future, a sustainable future for all. We need nonprofits to do what they do. We need all of us as individuals to do our part as well. We need the private sector to be part of this journey. We need the private sector to be committed to this vision. And this reaches out into the private sector. In some ways, you could say, bringing many elements of the cooperative principles to the private sector and saying, join us in building a better tomorrow. So I'm excited about that. There's such a case for it too. Increasingly, and if you've read Larry Fink from BlackRock, it's a $7 trillion global investment fund. They've flat out said over the last couple of years, we will no longer invest in companies that don't have a strong ESG, environmental social governance framework, because they're too risky. And the ones who have a more ethical, principled, purpose-driven foundation and framework, not only less risky, they're more successful. And that's where we're investing our money. Employees are increasingly choosing to work at a place with purpose. In addition to career opportunities and compensation, a place with purpose is what they prefer. Consumers are increasingly making their choices about what they purchase, where they purchase, and businesses they align with based on their values. So I think this is the future of business because our future depends on it. And increasingly, employees, consumers, investors are recognizing our need to evolve into a more purpose-driven economy with this kind of a vision. So I've put out some questions around the cooperative model, but I grounded it in what I think is always important is the vision of where we're trying to get to. And like I said, I think the cooperative model is an incredible model that embodies so many of these ideals. But my question there is it enough with the vision we're trying to create, with the challenges we're facing? And to me, part of why I'm really excited about the B Corp model is I think it helps us lean into the role we need to be playing in order to build the future that we all want. So those are my thoughts for today. I would welcome any questions. Marc-Andre, I don't know if you want to facilitate it, if you want people to put it into the group chat area or unmute.
Thank you so much, Brendan. That was a wonderful talk. I would ask people to maybe raise their hands and or use the chat, but just to signal their intent some way. So please, just because we have a lot of people on the call, it'd be great. Okay, here's a question from Nadine. So Brendan, I don't know if you can see the question. I'll just read it aloud so everyone can digest it. So how can the cooperative, quote unquote, family be more effective at saying who we are and what we do stand for?
There are people on this call who spent their careers working at that. So I don't feel I'm the person to answer that. I do believe that part of it is about messaging. I was just reading an article the other day about how to create change. And a couple of key pieces in there were, one of it was kind of the quote from Maya Angelou, people might forget what you did and they might forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And it's part of why I start with vision. And it's part of why I root everything in story, because I want people to feel what a cooperative is. I want people to feel what a cooperative does. I want people to have an emotional reaction to the impact and the vision that a cooperative is about. I know I started 20 years ago explaining what a cooperative was by listing the principles. And yes, my parents' eyes kind of glazed over, and they're beautiful, wonderful people. But when I started to tell story and started to tell story with impact and emotion in terms of the cooperative model and what it does, that started to stick and that started to resonate. And I think that's one piece of it. I think the other piece of it that is really important is understanding the language and the priorities of the people who are looking for solutions. It was very interesting I think it was about a year ago, the climate action strike around our legislature had about 10,000 people. And over the course of Winnipeg's history, I think it's one of the largest collections of people at one time around the legislature until this year when it was close to 20,000 for the Black Lives Matter March. 20,000 young people, and I would say the majority of them under the age of 40. And for the climate strike, the majority of those 10,000 people were under the age of 30. They are intensely passionate about a different kind of future. They are intensely passionate about taking action to create change. And in these cases, anti-racism and climate resilience. And as much as we would love to position cooperatives as one piece of the answer to their desperate vision for something different, I don't think we can sit back and hope they discover us. And I know that wasn't the question, but I think the communication needs to be rooted in their language and their vision and their concepts of justice and action. And even in the follow-up meetings with the climate strike folks from last year, the concern was fossil fuels and all of that conversation. And one of my colleagues was part of the meeting and posed the question, and the question was, have you thought about where your money is and where your parents' money is and whether or not it's contributing to the things you want it to? And they hadn't thought about it, but the second they thought about it, the action and the idea spread like wildfire. And they were about to launch a campaign this year to move money. But it came from their concept and from their language. And I think it's really important to be rooted in the communities that are leading the action, to understand how and where they would see the cooperative model as a solution.
Thank you, Brendan. That was great. Dion has a question. Dion, you can unmute yourself, please, and just ask away.
So thank you, Brendan. This was a really nice talk, and congratulations to ACU on that certification. My question, I don't know that much about this certification, but my understanding is it is a private certification. And so, there are some critiques sort of in the academic literature about private certifications, and some of them have sort of come, like these private certifications of business schools and policy schools and the educational system have proliferated. And there are some critiques about them. So I'm actually just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, who owns this certification, who governs it, who's in charge of deciding who gets certified, and what sort of their model is for sustainability of that organization itself that does the certification.
That's a great question. When you talk about private, you mean like full disclosure of our assessment score, or do you mean of the organization doing the assessments?
The organization is a private organization that's created this certification, is my understanding.
Yeah. Good question. And I think the idea of governance of this model is a really important one, and especially with such rapid growth. There's always risk when there's such rapid growth to maintain the integrity of the organization, because that's essential to retaining the integrity of the certification, right? So it's a good question. I don't know that I have all the answers for you on that. What I do know is that that these are the questions that are being asked in terms of just recognizing that different brands and different certification models have not necessarily always stood the test of time. And in part, there's many different reasons for that, but some of it might be kind of the integrity and the governance and the oversight and the transparency of the body doing the certification model. So I don't have the answer for you. What I do see at the level of evolution is that B Lab, the organization that leads this, is right now engaging with B Corps around the world in setting direction for the future and even refining the assessment. And part of it is the same question here, right? As much as I might say, are the cooperative principles enough? They're asking, is the B Corp assessment enough? When we're dealing with climate crisis, and when we're dealing, and for example, the things they're leaning into is the anti-racism work. And their question is, if the crisis we're dealing with right now is racism, discrimination, climate resilience, and economic injustice, is this assessment rigorous enough to really drive the change that we need? And they're engaging the B Corp community in asking these questions. So it's more of a collective input to help design and refine the process. So that piece of it is participatory and, in my experience, fairly transparent. So I appreciate that. In terms of the overall governance of the model, I don't know that I'm in a position to answer that part of your question.
Okay, Brendan, we have another question here from Michael Gertler. What about a co-op B Corp organization? How many of the B Corps are co-ops, and how do we increase the cooperative competitive advantage? It's a good question, Michael. I had something similar in mind, so go ahead, Brendan.
Always good questions from Michael. How many of the B Corps are co-ops? Not as many as I would like. It's partly why I was really excited to have this conversation with all of you. One of the issues in the US, and there'll be many experts on this call to correct me if I'm wrong, credit unions, for example, they're classified as nonprofits. And this model is not for nonprofits. They realize that the scope could get enormous if they include every entity on the planet. Their focus was in transforming how business was used as a force for good. So they don't include nonprofits as their certification model, which means that credit unions in the United States are not eligible. There are some cooperatives, but I don't think that bridge has been built strongly enough. In Canada, I do see a little bit more, and especially with the credit unions in Canada, there's a cohort of us that have been working through this. And there were some issues because there's a requirement for B Corps to change their articles of incorporation. If any of you have approached regulators in Canada about changing articles of incorporation for a credit union, you'll know that that's different. Our language is bylaws, right? That is where the members approve kind of the rules of the organization, if you will. So it took some time to process that, but we've managed to navigate that, and we do have several credit unions who are now certified B Corps. And I think part of the exciting component of that is that credit unions in Canada are very well connected to the cooperative movement and to our small business community especially. And we have an opportunity to be leaders as credit unions in educating, informing, and inspiring the businesses and the cooperatives in our communities to join with us on this journey.
Okay, Brendan, I'm going to ask Isabel to unmute herself. She has a question next, please.
Okay. Hi, Brendan. Thanks for that fascinating discussion. And I guess my question is sort of connected to Dion's as well, because I was thinking about certification in the business school context, and I appreciated your comments about, thought leadership in academia. But the problem is that academia is part of the problem for co-ops. So, in business schools, and I was there for 20 years, I could not teach a course in cooperatives. And so certification is often another way of reinforcing the status quo and the capitalist model. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thanks.
That's interesting. And I'll just ask a follow-up question. Do you mean, using a certification of a private owned model as opposed to teaching cooperatives as the solution?
But the fact that co-ops are not taught in mainstream educational institutions is an issue, right?
Okay.
If they're not even on your horizon, how do you pursue that option?
Exactly. No, and it's completely true. And this is why we've worked so hard over the years to bring in cooperative courses here at the Business School at University of Winnipeg, and cooperative courses at the University of Manitoba as well as social enterprise courses, to make sure that young future leaders and entrepreneurs are fully aware of the variety of business models available to them if they want to be entrepreneurial and do good, right? And yes, a private owned model with a B Corp certification is one way to do that. But of course, we want them all to understand that the cooperative model is another way to do that. And so is the social enterprise model. And so you're completely right. And it's it's a really good question that I've been trying to understand more. Why are not more cooperatives part of the B Corp movement? And I think because the connection hasn't yet been made. Part of it is in the world of academia, for sure. And to the extent that even governments around the world might be promoting the B Corp model, not all governments fully understand and or support the cooperative model either, right? I mean, we know the resources in Canada over the last number of years for co-op development from a government perspective, or funding for co-op development programs has really diminished. And so even to the extent that government support programs for business are promoting the cooperative model as well as, let's say, the B Corp model, is a great question. But I think it also goes back to some of that initial kind of culture and language, in that I don't know that the conversations have fully happened between the B Corp community and the cooperative community in all parts of the world. And a really important opportunity. Like I said, the cooperative principles and the cooperative model is such a great starting place for all of what B Corp is trying to accomplish. And I think it's such a natural opportunity to build that bridge, which will be great for the B Corp movement, but it'll also push cooperatives to continually evolve forward in this space, which will be great for the cooperative movement.
Brendan, I'm going to thank you so much for your time today. What a wonderful talk and great engagement. I feel like we could keep going, but I do want to be respectful of people's time. Before we wrap up, I want to tie into something you said just at the end about the governments maybe not having much awareness of the co-op model. And that is, in part, our mission at the center is working through policy schools to get some of that understanding out. So you've got the business schools on the one hand, and that's great and important, but you also have the policymaking community that's also important for reaching out to and deepening their co-op understanding. So with that, actually, that's a good way for me to introduce or just ask everyone to thank Brendan, please, maybe with an emotion, a reaction down here, clapping of hands or a thumbs up. That would be great. And also I want to just ask Stan to really quickly put up our notice to promote our certificate in cooperative social economy and cooperatives at the University of Saskatchewan. So this is just to the point you were raising earlier, Brendan, about governments. We have a certificate. It's not a B Corp certification, but it's a certificate all the same, that we're trying to get the word out about and encourage people to sign on to. So again, Brendan, thank you so much for your time today. This video will be posted on our YouTube channel in short order. And again, thank you for your talk, Brendan, and thank you for your audience today, everyone.
Thank you for having me. And it was so good to see everyone here, so many of you who have not seen it in a while, and it was wonderful. I appreciate you all.
Thanks, Brendan. Take care, everyone.